Thank you everyone for coming and showing up early to the conference to take part in our luncheon showcase. My name is Todd Albin. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Cedar Health Research and really excited to be part of this new collaboration in the industry. Just a little bit about myself. I've been in the clinical trial space now for about 25 years. I've spent the first 18 years of which operating research sites themselves at various locations throughout the United States, various therapeutic areas and site settings, integrated sites and standalone sites and site networks. Certainly been living in the trenches of the challenge of patient recruitment and have seen it getting more difficult and more challenging as protocols have gotten more complex over time. I then spent about 4.5 years working for Acurian, helping to manage global patient recruitment and retention campaigns, helping to manage the sites through those processes to really get optimization out of the investment that sponsors were making in terms of trying to accelerate clinical trial enrollment. And I also spent some time in the CRO space as well, helping develop internal site networks and really address patient recruitment challenges, how we can get better access to patients. But throughout my entire career, when this opportunity came around to help launch this company as part of this solution with Aspen Insights, I really jumped to it because I really think we have a way that we've kind of bridged how to identify large numbers of patients, effectively qualified patients, and get them actually enrolled through a clinical trial, the ultimate outcome that all of us here in clinical operations are looking for. So what I want to talk about is this amazing technology that Walter and Matt have talked about, this passion that Dr. Fink has in terms of helping to drive clinical innovation forward. How are we going to put this to practice through Cedar Health Research and our model, which is a very unique model in terms of the clinical trial space. But first, to kind of set the table, and I might be preaching to the choir to a lot of cases here, I wanted to talk about how clinical trials are typically recruited in today's world. What have been the two standards? And really, there's two pathways. There are patients that come in through external sources, through centralized patient recruitment or local site advertising, patients that are not known to the research site or the practice. And then there are those internal patients who come from the practice or the site database. And each one of these pathways has a lot of inherent flaws, which are causing a lot of the strain and breakdown in the system. And I'm going to kind of talk about those now. So first, centralized patient recruitment campaigns, very similar to what we were doing when I was at Acurian. These are very costly for sites to self-fund. They've also gotten very sophisticated with all of the digital marketing out there, all of the online tactics that are utilized in terms of identifying patients. Very challenging for sites, especially independent sites, to execute on their own. Larger site networks have resources, but smaller sites don't. And really, sites aren't marketers. They aren't digital advertising experts. They're clinicians. So a lot of times they have to leverage these central campaigns. But the problem is these campaigns are executed on national, international level. They're based on timing of the whole study. It's very difficult to align them with the day-to-day operations and what's going on at a research site. If they're running, if a patient recruitment company has spent $50,000 around a site to try to drive patients in over a 2-week period, but that's the same 2 weeks they're running their flu vaccine study, well, those patients are going to sit and they're not going to get contact and they're going to lose interest and that money is going to be wasted. So it's very difficult to align that. And then a lot of these campaigns, because you don't have medical history, you're generating a lot of pre-qualification questionnaires for patients to run through. You can't overscreen, you can't underscreen, so it creates a lot of patients that need to be followed up with, and they have to be followed up with promptly because they lose interest very quickly. And in those cases, a lot of sites don't have the bandwidth to properly address that. I saw cases where you send 100 referrals to a site, and they might only get through 10 or 20 in a week. By the time they get to the back end of the list, the patients have lost interest, they're hard to reach, they're hard to call back, just a lot of wasted time and effort there. And then when you actually do bring them in and you qualify them, you find a lot of them turn out to be unqualified, unreliable, non-compliant subjects. I've seen many cases where you can, do a questionnaire over the phone and ask the patient the same question about their medical history 3 times and get 3 completely different answers. And it's just without having that medical record, it makes it very, very difficult. So a lot of inherent challenges in this space. There's been a lot of great innovation, but is it actually moving the needle? Not to a great extent from what I've seen. So then the other more traditional model, is sourcing patients internally. So, when EHR systems came in, we all thought this was going to be a real game changer. But at the end of the day, EHR systems are not designed to recruit patients for clinical trial. They're designed to maximize billable revenue for practices, and they're really structured in that way and format. Their search tools aren't very user-friendly, and if you want to have a better search tool built, there's a lot of cost involved and a lot of trial and error there. So while EHRs are really effective at identifying and tracking and keeping medical histories, they're not a great tool for recruiting patients. At the same time, because the search tools don't really get into the granularity in terms of qualifying patients, you're still going through a large number of patients that have to be reviewed and qualified. And a lot of times, EHR-based patient recruitment is being done at integrated research sites that are within a practice. They don't really have the staff or the bandwidth to review these records and engage these patients in the timeliness that's required. It's a lot of patients. These search can come back with 1,000 patients with migraine headaches, but how do you know that they actually qualify? You have to dig deeper into all those charts because the search tools really don't serve that up for you. And then finally, the physician needs to be very much involved in that process in terms of being able to also go through the patients that were pre-qualified. It could be a very large number, determine which ones the study coordinator should call. A lot of work involved there, but at the end of the day, the physicians in integrated practices, they're not dedicated researchers. Their focus is getting through their patient loads of the day, providing the best care to their patients, making sure their practice is a successful business operation. Clinical research is, while it's a priority, it's not their main priority, and that will often be a fallback, and that's for a lot of reasons why physicians get in research and get out very quickly because they realize how disruptive it is to their practice operation. That's something Dr. Richards will be speaking about in a little bit. So essentially, looking at all these different challenges and then my experience of operating sites in all these different integrated and standalone site settings, and then looking at this incredible technology that Aspen Insights has developed, we thought about how can we put this all together in a model that makes sense and will work for really driving clinical trials forward in this century. So to give you an idea on how this all comes together in the clinical trial world and clinical operations and the world we live in day to day, I'm going to take you through what I consider really our what we call a full service end-to-end model. So first of all, when we're approached with a clinical trial opportunity, the first thing we're going to do is feed that protocol, like Walter demonstrated, into the Aspen Insights system. And that's going to generate a very predictable feasibility result based on our database of patients. It's not the, Dr. So-and-so, they're recruiting for an endometriosis study. How many patients do you think we can get? Oh, I see 20 a week. Put 60 on the list, and then the sponsor CRO gets it, and they're going to cut that in half, for their enrollment estimate, bring on a few extra sites just to make it, because they know that feasibility is just really inaccurate. So the first thing is our feasibility results using the artificial intelligence technology is going to really precision help us identify accurately how well we can recruit these patients and be able to provide forward to sponsors and CROs a number that you could rely on going forward, which will be demonstrated once we're able to actually execute the trial. If we're awarded the clinical trial, we then actually go into the patient recruitment process, and to understand how this works is that the Aspen software identifies the strong matches of patients. Now, we are a dedicated research site that is partnered with community physicians that are surrounding where we have our access to the patients and lab data, which we're going to be explaining in a moment. But essentially, these identified patients are made known and identified within the four walls of the practice in a completely HIPAA-compliant way. And the physicians are given a very high-ranking marked list of patients who qualify for this trial, and a very digestible number where we start off with their top 10 or 20 matches. If the physician feels this patient is a good fit for this clinical trial and it makes sense for them, they then introduce the trial to the patient. If the patient is interested, we then connect them with the Cedar Health Research patient engagement team, who then brings them over from the practice into Cedar Health Research, a dedicated clinical trial site that we have launched. Several sites, it's developing into a site network to support the trial and actually run the patient through the clinical trial in a standalone, state-of-the-art clinical trial setting, fully compliant, where the only priority is to provide great data to our sponsors. Throughout the trial execution process, though, it's very important to manage coordination of care with the physician who is treating the patient for the ailment, the physician who identified the patient and referred them over to Cedar Health Research. So we believe very strongly in coordination of care, because this will lead to better outcomes. So it will help keep the patient enrolled in the trial. It'll also help prevent adverse events affecting from us not being aware of new prescriptions. It'll be able to track what is happening to the patient in their regular treatment cycle with their physician, as well as keeping the physician informed as how the patient is progressing through the clinical trial as well. So essentially, all of this is going to create a lot of additional data exhaust. And a great part of our solution, our technology, is that as the patients are going through the clinical trial, we're getting data back and analytics back to understand, what characteristics, and factors made a patient more likely to continue on a study. What are some of the factors we can do to better qualify and identify patients, to feed back into the Aspen model, their algorithm, to keep producing better results as we advance throughout the same trial and onto different trials into the future as well. So in my estimation, I do consider this a revolutionary solution because it's addressing a lot of the pain points and coming up with solutions that are completely integrated. It can really provide U.S. sponsors and CROs a full-service approach in terms of addressing how you want to recruit and complete your clinical trials. So first, we're designing a process that increases the likelihood of successful study. Beginning with the end in mind, what factors need to be in place to make sure the study is going to be effectively done? Do we have the right patients? Do we have the tool to identify these patients? Do we have the clinical trial site and the expert clinicians to execute the trial? Our targeted recruitment and leveraging the Aspen Insights technology will really reduce the operational risk for the sponsors. Our goal is to be able to be 2 to 3 times more productive than any standard other research site with this tool. The idea being is less sites you need to open, less rescue sites, less add-on sites. If we can enroll, if you expect a normal site to be able to enroll 10 endometriosis studies, we feel we'll be able to enroll 30 patients in an endometriosis study. With our access to the patients, our ability to properly qualify them and execute them through our site, which is dedicated solely on clinical trials. This is expanding clinical trial access to practice physicians without increasing burden to their practice. And this is something that Dr. Richards is going to talk about shortly. But again, there's a lot of physicians who want to get involved in clinical research. They want to offer clinical research to their patients, but they just don't want to take on the burden of trying to bring clinical research into their practice. Finally, the coordination of care element increases the likelihood of participant retention. It will help improve safety and improve the accuracy of results. That that there is a feedback loop, that you're getting all the information of these patients as they're seeing their regular conditions, as well as what's occurring in the research. Everybody is in the loop. The care is coordinated. It's a great experience for the patient, and it provides the best data possible for the sponsor. So to give you just a little insight where we are right now in terms of our operation. So we're moving forward this year, launching. We have principal investigators focusing. Dr. Fink, our chief medical officer, is also our principal investigator for neurology, which will encompass pain, brain injury, migraine, headaches, things of that nature. We have Dr. Jeff Livingston, an experienced clinical researcher in women's health. And then we have Dr. Suyan Choi, another principal investigator for women's health, and then Dr. Robert Duhaney, who will manage internal medicine studies. Okay, so to give you a little bit about in terms of our patient access and where this really fits into our model. So we're launching, our companies are being launched out of Texas. We mentioned some relationships we have with Arbor Diagnostics and the physicians affiliated with Arbor Diagnostics throughout Texas and the greater Southwest. This amounts to right now about 500,000 lives that we'll have access to. Currently, with our current integrations, as we're moving forward, we're integrated within 60 physician practice partnerships, and it's not just their EHR data, it's also their lab information system data. So another unique piece of what we have is we're leveraging just not the electronic health record, but also their lab record as well, and we have full integration into both of those systems. We have a dedicated patient recruitment team at Cedar Health Research to really provide a patient-centric, concierge-level process for the patient to make sure that we manage this process of their care with their physician and us at Cedar Health Research at the same time to provide the best possible outcomes. We're currently launching with 2 sites in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, a western site in the Irving area, and then eastern site in the North Dallas area that are operational. And then coming soon, we'll be having additional sites in Houston, Austin, and San Antonio as we move forward. But presently, you know, we're available and ready to start launching studies in women's health, neurology, and internal medicine out of our 2 Dallas sites with access to the physician partnerships, the patients around those sites. So finally, the last piece, but what I consider the most critical piece, is the physician and patient relationship, because obviously none of this works without the patient. And as I was explaining, getting the patient access and exposure and education about clinical trials, the best person to make that happen in the relationship cycle is not an ad that they see in the newspaper or they get on their Facebook page. It's their own physician introducing the study to them. All of the studies have shown that is the most effective way in which a patient can be really properly recruited into a clinical trial. So we've really built this around this physician collaboration.